Hey everyone, DestroyFX here, and today we're going to take a closer look at DestroyFX Buffer Override plugin. This is a free plugin by DestroyFX, and if you have seen my loop-up video, you will have seen this plugin before, or if you have seen the demo video I posted fairly recently. And in this video I want to explain some of the features and the UI, and how you can harness the power of this plugin. Buffer Override, like the name suggests, is a buffer plugin, and for demonstration's sake I will be using Atlas 2.0 today, because the graphical interface gives me a pretty easy way to show the concepts of this plugin. So let's not waste too much time and let's get straight into it, and let's start talking about the main features of this plugin. And this will be slightly simplified, but for the functionality, this is, I think, the clearest way to explain what's going on here. So our main two controls in this interface, you can pretty much ignore all the other stuff for now, are the buffer size and the divisor. And for this demonstration, we have the tempo sync on. So right now we're generating one buffer every beat, which is a count. So it's just quarter note pulse is one beat. And this beat is not divided at all. So right now, if we play this back, you get a bass drum every other beat. So beat 1 and beat 3 is bass drum, beat 2 and 4 are empty. So every beat will be a single buffer and it's not divided at all. Now if we start to increase this divisor, and there's a bit of a rounding thing with this, it took me a second to find out, but with some help someone pointed out that if you just raise it 0.1 over the value you want, it actually goes correctly. So what we're doing now is we're buffering one beat, then we're splitting it into two parts, so you will have 2 counts and 2 counts, and the second 2 counts will be a repeat of the first 2 counts. So effectively what is happening is it's starting the buffer, and it buffers to the second half of the beat, and then it repeats the first half of the beat. So if we bypass it, it's essentially this. And that's the really quick overview of what this plugin is doing. Now, of course, this allows for a lot more creativity than just this, but let's just do some experiments here to show you how it works. So let's go for 4. So our expected result is that it still buffers a single beat. So it will buffer this. It will split it in 4. And it will repeat this for every beat. So what we're expecting to see is it will buffer this quarter and repeat it like this. So our expected result is this. So let's see what happens. Let's turn it on. There we go. Now let's talk a little bit about this buffer size. So what happens if we make this buffer size bigger? So let's move it up a little bit. Let's go to half a buffer per beat, which means that a full buffer will be 2 beats. So now a single buffer will be from here all the way to there. That entire thing will be 1 buffer. And let's divide that into 2. So the first half of our buffer is now this full beat, and that will be repeated here. So we should get 8th notes now. There we go. And if we divide it into 4, we will get 16 notes. And And if we go for 8, now one thing to note when I put it to 2, you can hear you lose a little bit of attack, and that has to do with the smoothing in the buffer. The second buffer will start slightly smoothed, so you lose the attack of this bass drum. Probably if we smooth 0, there you go. Now the risk of not using smoothing is that if you have something that goes over the edge, that you will get a weird clipping noise. And this can be reduced with the smoothing. But obviously you will lose a little bit of clarity in your sound if you use the smoothing. So that's the main premise of buffer override, and it becomes a little bit more complicated once you turn off the tempo sync and you start to automate things, because then the buffer size can dynamically change and what is being buffered can change as well. Which is also part of the fun of this plugin, really. It's very, very experimental if you want it to be. So you can use it like this, very mathematical, just determine the amount of beats a single buffer is and then divide it and you get very clean results. But it becomes a lot more fun once you start to use the other tools like the LFOs to automate things like the divisors and the buffer size. So let's start off with the divisor automation. Let's just turn it on. Sine wave seems about right. So now we can see the buffer divisor moving around. Well, I might want to have a little bit more. There we go. So how about there? All right. So let's see what this does. Let's get a click in there. That's some pretty syncopated stuff, and you can use the other controls here as well. Let's actually tempo sync this to a quarter beat, so it will update every quarter beat. And let's make it a little less predictable and use the sample and hold shape. So this allows you to generate very, very erratic rhythms and textures. And it doesn't have to be just with drums. Of course, you can use it with any other instrument as well. And I will demonstrate it in a little bit with an arpeggiator to show you how you can very dynamically shift arpeggiated melodies. For now, let's turn off actually the divisor, and let's turn up the buffer. Let's also tempo sync this to quarter beats. So you can see that it now changes the length of the buffer. A tricky thing with this is because there is only a 1 count in this particular groove, is that often you will not buffer anything. So let's actually solo the hi-hat for this, because it will demonstrate a little bit better what it can sound like. And actually, let's just quickly take this note out. So now we just have a straight 8s pattern, I think. Now we have a better chance for the buffer actually buffering something. And now let's also kick in the divisor. Important to note here is I'm using rather small values to keep things fairly easy to hear. Once you start to crank these numbers a fair bit, things will get pretty chaotic pretty fast. And as a general rule of thumb, if you're using the tempo sync mode, if you want to have a fairly predictable and kind of rhythmically less advanced patterns, you want to keep the values rather small, so you want to be at the top of the scale. And if you want to really glitch things out, you need to move down to a lower part of the scale. So let's just quickly do this beat. I think I had it here. So let's do it without. Now let's turn it on. It's still 100% wet. And let's turn off the LFOs for a second. And let's shrink these values a little bit. So it's a really cool effect, both using it as more of a delay-ish kind of effect, or if you just want to glitch things out. And for glitching out, I would highly recommend using automation a lot, because just running this passively at a value kind of sounds pretty bad. I guess this is fairly okay. Kind of proves that if you just randomly click every now and then, you get lucky. But in general, the effect is better if you just have it glitch in and out. So that's buffer override in a nutshell. Now, aside from the LFOs for the divisor and the buffer size, like I said, you have the smoothing, so you can maintain attack if something is at the start or end of a buffer, or prevent things from glitching out. Wet dry control is pretty obvious. You can tempo sync with the host or have this running in its own tempo. Once again, I would say if you're trying to do something that is not too rhythmically advanced, I would definitely keep it synced with the host. If you just want to create really odd, weird sound effects, you could definitely let it go running free. And down here, we have some more controls, and this is for the MIDI. Now, right now I am running this with a MIDI eater in front. This is a Reaper thingy. This prevents MIDI from leaking into the VST. If we disable this, Atlas will actually send MIDI into this track as well, and you will see that the automation will start going nuts once we start this thing. Because now the MIDI is changing the divisor. You can actually give it a range as well. So you can MIDI control this. You could also tie this to a MIDI controller, so you can just use a pitch bender or whatever to move this around if you want to. That's totally a possibility. Nudge mode is an option. Changes the buffer divisor. With the trigger, nodes also reset the divisor to 1 when they are released, which creates, in this case, so every time there's not a note playing in this, it will switch back to 1. Personally, I prefer having the MIDI eater to keep some control. At the same time, you might just run into something that works really well with the MIDI triggering going on. If you happen to load this plugin and stuff starts to move all around, that's your problem. You're feeding MIDI into it. And you can, of course, fix that by either disabling MIDI going into this VST, or if you're using Reaper, you can use the MIDI eater to prevent this from happening. So that's all the basic controls for this VST, and I want to show a little bit of this kind of setup, but instead of with drums, we will use a nice little arpeggio. For this we will be using a UVI Falcon. Very nice little VST. There we go. We can probably use just a preset because there's some pretty cool ARP sequences. Let's just go with this. Now once again I want to use the DestroyFX Buffer Override, and because Falcon is receiving MIDI, I will put a MIDI eater in between Buffer Override and Falcon to keep it from receiving MIDI and spacing out on me. Now the controller I'm using doesn't have a key latch, so this is going to be a little bit creative. So here we go. So yeah, that's a really cool way to quickly mess up arpeggiated patterns. And especially, again, with automation, you can really do some interesting things where you can make stutters and glitches. And best part of this VST is that it's completely free. So I would highly recommend just going to the website, grabbing it, playing around with it, and see what kind of cool effects you can get from this. So that's the DestroyFX Buffer Override. If there are any questions, you can just drop them down below in the comments. And if you want to see more of me and my music stuff, check out my channel or check out my Instagram. That's it for now, and have a great day.